You're listening to Crossing Borders with ANYP for the Always Next Year Podcast Studio Network. You can find the team on our Twitter at ANYPodcast or visit us on our website, www.alwaysnextyearpodcast.com. And now, to bring us in, the Jackdaws.
A fighting man I used to be, revered and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hitching with the wind. But if Mickey Flynn should ever find me, I'll throw me caution all behind me and square off on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too, he beat me Sunday through and through, and such over my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, well lucky son, still happy life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Crossing Borders here at Always Next Year Podcast Studio Network. I'm your host, Shane. I am joined as always by Connor. Connor, sir, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's NBA and NHL free agency time,
Surviving.
so I've been surviving. I've been having a blast.
Yeah, man. Look, Twitter's been a crazy, crazy place, and kudos to L, man. Him keeping up with he's not even a hockey guy, but he was keeping us posted with hockey things before I even saw them come out, while also keeping our account up to date and current with all the NBA moves. But it has been a wild 24 hours in sports.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've been on the Twitter account since like 10 a.m., just sitting on my couch. I've been the one doing it all day today. So I was like, geez, this has to slow down at some point.
Clearly, you both deserve a bonus. So appreciate you. I appreciate L. L, obviously, our host of Kelly Green Hour with you on it, our Eagles segment. This is our take segment. So we've discussed this a lot. We've decided that we're going to kind of shake it up the way that we do this show now. Previously, we would find specific tweets that we both agreed with or agreed was a good tweet. And we would say, all right, I'm going to formulate my argument and you formulate yours. Well, Connor, turns out we agree a lot. So there wasn't too much debate. There wasn't too much. It was a lot of just, well, I agree. Let's move to the next. So we decided now that we are going to pick 4 just blanket topics, one for each of the core 4 sports. And each of us would find our own tweet somewhere in the Twitter universe that helped kind of portray whatever it was that we were feeling, whether it was the tweet pissed us off that much or this is everything that I wanted to say and more. Sound good?
Absolutely.
All right, so the 4 blanket kind of topics that we chose from this week were, for the Philadelphia Phillies, it was Kapler and his perceived hot seat. Should he be the one to blame for the concerns that have been the Philadelphia Phillies over the last month? The Flyers was the disconnect between Chuck Fletcher and the fan base, or at least the ones that are on Twitter, who are not overly a fan of Chuck Fletcher to this point. The Eagles were actually just going to kind of elaborate a little bit more onto each of our thoughts on an argument that you guys started on Kelly Green Hour, which was, is it a quality in the quarterback's room or is it more just quantity? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then obviously we're going to talk 76ers free agency, and we're going to, when we took our original notes for this show, it was pre-free agency. So this is going to be Connor's tweet is actually okay. Mine, I'm actually going to have to rework here as we go through. But those are the 4 topics. Connor, I'm going to give you dealer's choice here. What topic you want to start with first?
I think we should start. We might as well start with the Flyers, because
right.
I have a draft take that I have, because I thought that the draft was actually really good, as much as the cry. I'll give you the tweet. So it's from @Blake_Eisenberg. It says, quote, every NHL analyst, Cole Caulfield is the best goal scorer in this year's draft. Flyers, choose a defenseman who won't be ready to play for a few years. So first of all, in addressing this tweet, I completely disagree with the tweet, because Cole Caulfield has already committed to 2 years in college. So he is no more ready than Cam, who we took with the first pick, Cam York. So in relation to the who won't be ready to play for the next few years, Caulfield's probably 3 years out as well, same as Cam York. So that was just kind of something I had to throw out there, just because this guy clearly didn't fully understand the circumstances of Cole Caulfield. I find Cole Caulfield extremely undersized, and I understand a lot of people will have that similar concern with Bobby Brink, but Bobby Brink, I find his entire game is a more polished game, whereas Cole Caulfield has to bulk up. He has to work on some aspects on the defensive side of it. Yes, he can score, but is that going to translate at the NHL level? Bobby Brink was ranked as the best shooter in the entire draft, or many said he was the best shooter in the entire draft, which will probably translate well into being a goal scorer in the at the NHL level as well. And I also think, like, where was he fitting? Our pipeline is so deep with Frost and Farabee and Ratcliffe. You look at the Phantoms and free agency, the 6 signings today was a couple defensemen who will basically be sent to the Phantoms because our defensive pipeline is dry. That when we called up Philip Myers, that basically dried up the last of the solid pieces.
Not a TJ Brennan fan?
Not a huge one. Not when you look at them in comparison to Provorov and Myers and Gostisbehere and Sanheim and what they all bring. I think we've dried the pipeline up pretty good. So I kind of like the focus on defense, and I kind of like the way that he took this year's sign and needs. So he knows the third right wing slot has to be filled. The top 4 D-man slot had to be filled. And he went and he said, well, I got short-term fixes for, the third right wing slot will probably be a prospect. But he got short-term fixes for the top 4 D-men. So instead he said, I got the short-term fixes, so I'm going to look at the long-term as well. And I found that he did a great job because he drafted 3 right wingers, 3 defensemen, and a goalie. So he had a good focus on not just addressing the spot in the short term, but making sure there was a backup plan when the short term ended. So I personally really liked the draft. And my final take on that whole situation was Flyers fans will forget about Caulfield as our current prospects begin arriving in Philadelphia. I think Fletch aced this draft, and I actually have a write-up piece coming out at the start of the week. Great in the draft as well.
So that's a really, really smart view of the draft and the take. And it's one that embarrassingly so, I did not have on the night of that draft. So I was one of the ones that sat there, and it's been so long since we have had that true bona fide scorer that shoot first mind, which is exactly what Caulfield was. And Steve said it, on Disciples of Ed. He said it on the Twitter. It's 72 goals is no joke, and it's true. But the next day, when everything kind of settled down and you had time to digest, I was embarrassed for the very reasons that you just said. We do have an incredibly deep prospect line in terms of our forward depth here. When you do take a look at the guys who are currently playing in college or in their junior teams, there is so much there. And we do not have really anything in the way of replenishable defensive pieces, or at least not anyone that's anywhere really near NHL ready. So I thought it was incredibly smart. As that day 2 of the draft went through, I started to get more and more on board. Not unlike Rob, who mentioned it in Disciples of Ed. He did not know much about York, nor did I. We both went. We studied up some of the articles that have been written about him. We watched some of the YouTube highlights and different clips such as that. And there's nothing but good things to see there. And for a defensive room that's incredibly crowded right now as it is, be it the young guys that we expect to have, an impact over the next, 5 to 10 years, or if it's the placeholding veterans right now who are there to continue to add some stability to what that defensive room is for the Philadelphia Flyers right now, it's going to allow guys like York to take their natural development course, college, wherever he's going, whatever he's doing. He doesn't have to be an immediate impact player, and it allows for the Philadelphia Flyers to, again, just as you mentioned, utilize this year's draft class to tackle the glaring hole in the prospects right now, which was our defense. So that's a really, really smart point. I like that.
And I mean, you look at it, Cam York's comparables, I don't know if you've seen them, Brian Leach and Keith Yandel.
Yep.
That's the type, if you're being compared to Brian Leach, that's impressive. You have to think there's something in that game that's really going to translate well. What?
How are you with comps? So I always sit there and I mean, the easiest one right now, just to benefit my argument as to why comps don't really matter, is the Sam Morin and Chris Pronger tie. It was basically just due to stature, nothing else. But
It's true. It has a lot to do with style. It's all about style and build. It's not so much about what necessarily they bring from a statistical standpoint or whatever. But I kind of take them with a grain of salt.
That's
If you compare, like usually you get a comparable that's with like the present day, someone playing like Keith Yandel, but they were talking during the draft about his comparable being like a Brian Leach. How often do you see a comparable where you're looking
you don't.
back in time? Exactly. And to a Hall of Fame defenseman, nonetheless. Like, I think there's a lot to look forward to if you have that type of comparable. But yes, I do take them with a grain of salt. It's just good to know, like, you can go and look at Brian Leach or Keith Yandel's highlights and look at Cam York's, and you should see similar stylistic play is more or less what they're looking for. It's more or less what you look at. So, I mean, I think that I take them with a grain of salt, but I get where you're coming from in that aspect, that you can't just say, we got the next Brian Leach and we're going to have a Hall of Fame defenseman before he even arrives in the NHL. I see that standpoint, so I get that. And, like, what bothers me about Flyers Twitter right now, and there's a lot of things, but this is a big thing. They are complaining about not drafting Caulfield, yet complaining about every sign-in or every move that Fletch does that might block a Frost or a Farabee or a Ratcliffe from coming up. Well, where are you going to put Caulfield? I just don't understand what people see. You just go, you have this guy, you continue to clog the pipeline. So do you just want a bunch of 22-year-olds skating on the ice with no veteran support, no veteran presence, nothing? You just want all the veterans out of the way. Don't take on any contracts like a Braun or a Niskanen. Just clear the way for the entire pipeline in one season, and let's see what that pipeline does.
Look, Philadelphia Flyers Twitter is a maddening place, and we see that all the time from guys that have been guests on our shows, and we've been guests on theirs. There are days where it is tough to get up and go to work and do what we do when we sit here and talk Flyers hockey to the Twitter community that is the Philadelphia Flyers Twitter universe. It is brutal for that very reason. They're so short-sighted, and which kind of leads me into my tweet, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But when you sit there and you have to, analyze something beyond just right now, and you have to look at how these things work and connect together over the next 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years and beyond, you have to sit there and see how those pieces fit together and what benefits what. You can't, just as you mentioned, you can't put a bunch of 20-year-old kids out there on the ice and say, well, we'll all figure it out together or we'll all fail together. Well, that's not how this works. There is a proven method here as to having those in front of you who have done it, who can eat up the ice time and who can allow for natural progression and development for these kids. You can't do it all at once. It is impossible.
It's just so short-sighted. I mean, look at the Braun and Niskanen acquisitions. They're like acting like it's a 5-year contract we're tied to. No, it's 1 and 2 years. And who are they blocking from coming up? Who are they standing in the way of? They're not standing. I mean, from our group chat, I'm the Flyers optimist this year, and I know it's hard to be when you, Steve, and Elle are all just want to be the pessimist. But
reactionary.
Reactionary. Okay, reactionary. Okay, that just makes you sound a bit better. But
I try to romanticize everything.
I mean, like, what else are you gonna do with Braun? Like it's 1 year. He's a stay-at-home defenseman. I mean, I could go on and on about this offseason because I've been defending it and been on Twitter defending it and trying to get people to understand and see the stats. We needed stay-at-home defensemen. That was the reality of the situation.
Well, it fits stylistically with what this new coaching regime has.
Exactly, but I mean, were you really going to run it back with the same 6 D-men and watch that defense? Run it back
quote for the Flyers as opposed to the Sixers. That's great.
Yeah, you bet. Like, are you seriously? Do you want to do that with those same 6 defensemen? Do you want Carter Hart to face 40 shots a night when these guys could help it become a 30 shot a night potentially?
Of course not. But here's my issue, and here's my tweet that I use and that I selected. It's from Scott T at NHL Flyer. Chuck Fletcher, and this is an overreaction to what my reactions are, but it's like if you were to hyperbolize what I was feeling throughout this offseason thus far, you would get this tweet. Chuck Fletcher is now just one Shane Gostisbehere trade away from becoming my mortal enemy. Now, for me, it's that, like I said, it's that hyperbole of what I've felt throughout this offseason. So every single trade that he's made or signing that he's made or anything that he has done, I've yet to sit there and say, wow, this is good. I'm on board with this. I don't have reservations. And I think that's what a lot of the fan base, myself included, are looking for is that one move where we can definitively take that sigh of relief that says, all right, I get this one. This is good. There was taking the 30%, of Gudas along with, taking on the additional cap hit to help out a divisional rival for the Washington trade. It was shipping out 2 draft picks where you didn't need to for a guy who is not the sexiest of D-men out there. He's going to be probably a third pair guy. I take a look at those things and I'm like, I've yet to be wowed by anything. And it bothers me because I think of Chuck Fletcher as someone who is just out there, and the first idea and thought that comes to his brain, he wants to make it a reality immediately without taking the time. And let's face it, the NHL is not like the NBA. The NBA, you don't necessarily have time to react and diagnose every single opportunity or player that may come your way in free agency, because it's basically done in 24 hours. The NHL, you have a little bit more time. They could have waited on some of those and gotten, whether it be better value in those trades or whether, they would have lessened what they sent in packages, lessen the dollar, amounts on a guy like Kevin Hayes, which I think is actually going to have a very nice year now. I've finally come on board on that one. But I sit here and I relate to this tweet on a level of if I was to get super, super angry on any particular day about the Flyers, I'm sure this is how I sound. By no means is he my mortal enemy, but I am still sitting here, as is a lot of the fan base, I believe right now, waiting for him to make a move that I can definitively say I am 100% on board with, and I have been from the moment I've heard it.
But I mean, you look at the way the free agency's going right now. How is it going to get any better? He has to pay Konechny. He has to pay Provorov. So many people, like, we couldn't go out there.
Just going to skip out on Lawton right there. I love Scotty Lawton. They got to pay him too.
Well, Lawton. Oh, okay. But we can live without. Like, he's not someone who has to be there. We can move on from him.
What, you want to talk about up?
I've heard a lot of good stuff out of the development camp. I mean, you could have Rubatsov come up. There's other people who could end up coming up. And you want to talk about someone who's blocking a spot for a prospect, I think eventually Lofton would be that guy that we sit there and say, can we just move on? Can he get out of the way so that Frost can come up, or Rubatsov, or can we get him out of the way for somebody else? That's going to be that guy down the road. I mean, if you look in the take away the short-sightedness of Flyers Twitter and look into the long term, Lofton will be in the way. What do you see him doing beyond being a third line, fourth line guy? Fourth line, in my opinion. He probably won't move. He probably won't do much.
He's a perfect fourth liner, honestly. If you keep giving that guy, $1.5 million, $2 million a year to kill penalties and be on the fourth line, he can play center and wing. I think a depth forward like Lawton is invaluable to a team that, and especially a team that's going to very clearly be very differently defensively minded this year than they were as of previous years. And I think it plays to a guy like Lawton as well. I actually think you might have a really, really strong year out of him.
Yeah, I kind of honestly hoped we would go back and get Bellmaier, but I understand where that came from. I loved Pierre Bellmaier, so it hurt to see him go to the Avs and not come this way, but I mean, it happens.
Yeah, well, I don't think that they ever really assumed that he would have been the one that was taken in that Golden Knights expansion draft.
No, but it was tough. It was a tough call when especially with the next expansion coming up for Seattle, you just don't know who they're going to take. You can only block so much, and just think about that right now. Like, think about
we could have a whole show on that.
Yeah, but think about just the fact that we have to block 10 guys. But think about all that talent that we leave open to that Seattle team to just
it's horrifying.
Anybody to take. Exactly. So, I mean, it doesn't hurt to have some bad pieces. They can go and take Scott Lofton. Like, I'm okay with that. lot, and I'm okay with that. But I mean, it's just like based on the cap, based on the RFAs, and based on the long-term outlook, what were we gonna do? Like Sebastian Aho just got offer sheeted 8.9 million. Who just got
8.9?
8.9 by Montreal.
I love Aho.
So, I mean, just think about it. No matter what, you were going to be cap strapped at some point if we had went with the flashier player than Kevin Hayes. Maybe we overpaid, but look at how much some of these people are going 12, 11, 10 million dollars. We don't actually have the worst of contracts, in my opinion.
I think the biggest thing for the Hayes deal is just the term of that, going, that 7 years. It's just
the term, and he doesn't flash. Like you were talking about a flashy and sexy defenseman. Name me a flashy and sexy defensive defenseman. Someone that gets your motors going when you watch him poke a puck away. Find me one.
Doesn't happen. Not in today's NHL, not with the skill level,
No, you want a Shane Gostisbehere who has a figure skating background, who you watch those hips move and him taking the shot, and you're like, man, look at how that guy skates. That's a flashy and sexy defenseman.
Well,
you just don't get it.
100% clear here. The sexiest thing about Shane Gostisbehere is that one-time slap shot.
Absolutely.
It is not his skating ability, although it is beautiful out there watching him out there on the ice.
His skating ability is exceptional. Like, you don't see a D-man who can move like that and stuff. So, I mean, the fact that he's able to skate with that ability, and I think that bodes well for the one-timer. That's why the one-timer is so good.
Oh, yeah. And it just tremendous lower body control. But we've went 20 minutes now on Flyers hockey. So let's roll into the second one. You took the first one. You went Flyers. I'm going to go Phillies here. It's only natural. You're the hockey guy. I'm the baseball guy. So again, our topic was for the Gabe Kapler's perceived hot seat. So I have two tweets that I'm going to go with. First one is I'm actually going to use one that came from our podcast account. It was a poll that came out. It was basically stating, and this was after I believe it was one of the Marlins games from last week. Man, Twitter is rough today on Cap. All these fire Kapler tweets. Season's lost. They've quit. Blah blah blah. We hope that, basically stating that we hope that our fans of the podcast are smart enough to know that this is not Gabe Kapler's fault. So despite all the madness and everything that's going on and how bad this team has been over the course of these 5-6 weeks here, we broke it down into 4 different categories for this particular poll. It was, he is the problem. He's top 3 on everyone's list. He's he's between 5 and 10 on people's lists, or he is the problem. So the percentage breakdowns were 21%, 21%, 30%, and 28%. So not a whole lot of separation there. And then the second tweet that I had that kind of coincides and goes with that was Al Morganti, who I love. And if you don't follow him on Twitter, he is funny. It is at Nuffsaid, which is hilarious. NUFCED. And his tweet read, Gabe Kapler has won me over. Now, obviously, Al Morganti, part of the morning crew with Angelo Cataldi that continually bashes and attacks Gabe Kapler and every single thing in the city for sports. I always find Al Morganti to be kind of the voice of reason and that exception there. And he proves it on Twitter. So for me, I have defended this as hard as you have defended everything for the Philadelphia Flyers this offseason, whether it be the trades, whether it be the GM as a whole. I have defended Gabe Kapler so damn much that I am almost tired of talking about it. But I'm not so tired to talk about it as to not give these points some time on crossing borders. So I'm just going to ask a couple questions and tell me if you value Kapler as more detrimental than these particular few circumstances. Sound good?
Okay.
All right. Andrew McCutchen, a guy who was notoriously healthy. We went with him over Brantley specifically for the health and stability and track record there of being available. In a freak accident, tears his ACL. Do you think that the Phillies were planning on that?
Absolutely not. And McCutchen was putting up exceptional numbers. They were comparable to Brantley's when he went down. And when you say freak accident, I don't think I've ever seen an ACL just go so quickly and so easily right before your eyes. He just took a step and boom, he came up hurting.
Yeah, Well, Rajon Rondo did that too, which was the exact thing that I thought of when I saw it happen. But that's one thing. 7 different members of the bullpen go to the IL, 6 of which are very integral pieces to your bullpen, one of whom was a reliever that we acquired via free agency this year, specifically, again, for, you guessed it, his health and durability. One, David Robertson, has not pitched since third week of the season now. Do you value that situation over there, the entirety of that bullpen being on the IL, as more detrimental than that of what Gabe Kapler does during games?
Oh, I think that's probably one of the most detrimental pieces to this whole season, is that the bullpen hasn't been able to be healthy and our pitchers haven't been able to find consistency. I mean, just as Nola begins to find consistency, well, look who's starting to not. Well, Velasquez never had it, but Zach Eflin, Pavetta's meh, and Velasquez has never even been worth
should never
complimenting.
Be spoken about.
Exactly.
But that brings up point number 3. We spent all this money in the offseason this year on providing a more potent offense that has not produced. Let's face it, that's another thing. So Malley for me is immediately also above Gabe Kapler. But in spending all this money here and then all this, well, not all this money, but they acquired pieces last year at the deadline, none of which were starting pitching. Klentak and this management team and front office has decided continually to put their trust in wild cards, such as can Jake Arrieta regain form? We don't know. Vince Velasquez should never be a pitcher on this roster anywhere anymore, and that's vastly different from what I said a few weeks ago. Nick Pivetta, as much as I love him, wild card. And Zach Eflin, you're going to get 8 fantastic starts, 8 terrible starts, and then just some meh stuff in between. Very, very unsexy, and they've continued to not attack that. Is that Gabe Kapler's fault?
Absolutely not. There's no defending that situation with the pitchers. They should have made a move by now. Am I on board with all the ones people are throwing out? Not necessarily. I'm not a huge Minor fan, so I don't necessarily think that helps. I think that just will end up putting us in an Arrieta-like situation again down the road. It's tough. It's a really, really tough situation. And I think it's something that they just need to address at the upper level now, and just go out and make a deal, and let's see what happens.
Beyond those points, they decided to put their trust in, once again, Maikel Franco at third base instead of going for Moustakas. And he's having a pretty goddamn awesome season out there. And that is making me so much more angry than I ever needed to be watching Maikel Franco attempt to play baseball every single time I see a Moustakas highlight. Odubel Herrera goes ahead and becomes an all-around awful human, and allegedly. That's 2 more things Gabe Kapler should have never had to have dealt with. And throughout each of the circumstances I mentioned, and probably a dozen more beyond that, Gabe Kapler has kept this team last season all but 6 weeks in first place. They crumbled at the end because there's no possible way that anyone could keep that team sustaining that type of winning success. The fact that they made it all the way up into August in the conversation is fucking amazing. This year, throughout all the circumstances that have occurred, a couple weeks ago, they're a game or 2 out of the second wild card spot. At the point that I was making these different notes for this particular segment, Rhys Hoskins and Bryce Harper were 62nd and 48th in home runs in baseball. That's not something that anyone could have planned or banked on, especially not at Citizens Bank Park. Nothing has gone according to plan. And through that all, he has kept them in the conversation of postseason and kept them nearing the conversation of, yes, we are still going to be buyers. We are not sellers at the deadline. So Gabe Kapler is not at all deserving of the severity of criticism that he has faced thus far in his Philadelphia Phillies tenure as manager of the Phillies. And it drives me goddamn crazy.
Yeah, so I have a more direct tweet here, and it's not directed at Kapler, but it's directed at the need for change. So this is from at Austin Villanova. I don't know if people follow him, but he is a great follow, comments on everything Philly sports, mainly basketball. But so his was, quote, the Phillies spend $500 million this offseason and have a payroll of $155 million this season. They're going to lose 7 games in a row. So this was at the time where we were about to get swept by. We got swept by the Marlins. Swept by the last place Marlins at home and out 6.5 games in the division after leading by as many as 4.5 games. Someone needs to be fired. End quote. I agree with this. Whether it be somebody gets fired or a big move is made where you move Franco, you move Hernandez, you move some of those pieces that you can use, that you can move, something has to happen. It's just becoming painful to watch. And to watch winning 1 of 2 from the Marlins again, it's just so excruciatingly painful to watch this team now. I mean, we went over the offensive struggles in past episodes and the numbers and just how abysmal they are, but something has to change, in my opinion. And whether that be firing, whether that be a trade, there needs to be a shakeup. It's not like keeping all these guys together it's like, oh, they'll get out of it. I don't think they will. I don't think that that's an option, is to continue to roll with this, because it's been such a bad 3-week stretch that I think it's time. Like it says,
well, it's beyond 3 weeks if you think about it.
Well beyond. We went from 4.5 games up to, I don't even know where we're at now, but we must be 6 or 7 out of first still.
I think we're still 8 out of first, but or 6 out of first. Excuse me. It was a 8-game swing, I think, the last time I checked. But yeah, I mean, when you think about it, even when the Phillies, and I tweeted this earlier and I got mercilessly attacked for it on Twitter. They were never a fun team this year outside of that first week and a half of the season. This is a team that should not have been winning baseball games. They were winning because one of the 3 main areas of their roster was doing just enough to get by. The other parts of that roster were not doing anything. They were winning those close games, close, low-scoring games. They were sitting there and they were winning games that had to come down to the wire that never should have. When the offense puts up 7 or 8 runs and starting pitching's awful, nothing about this team has gone well this year. And that's where I do kind of agree, where there still needs to be a major shakeup, but that major shakeup and decision is most certainly not Gabe Kapler.
No, I agree. It definitely cannot be. It doesn't make sense for it to be Kapler. There's been so many situations out of his control. You make it look like he's on the hot, so you go and you fire Malley, and then you just see what happens from there. And maybe by the end of the season, Kapler is the one who has to go. Maybe.
Yeah, that's what we talked about.
I mean, I called for Brown's job if he didn't get through the playoffs, but he showed some exceptional grit coaching wise in that Toronto Raptors series. So, I mean, Kapler is showing some exceptional managerial skill through all of this. I think, in my personal opinion, does it show in the team's effort and the team stats? Maybe not. But think about going through all of this. Think about putting any manager through this. You could bring anybody into this situation.
That's been my point consistently.
I just don't think that it gets any better. That same as Brett Brown. He had the same starting lineup for 10 games when he went into the playoffs. And then he went into the playoffs with an unhealthy and out of shape Joel Embiid and just a lack of consistency from the team in general. So similar to Brett Brown, I think, is Gabe Kapler. And I think we're going to see, from a basketball standpoint, Brett Brown have an exceptional year with a full roster at his disposal for a full 82 games. So, I mean, for Kapler, it's just getting that consistency for the full season or getting the weapons he needs to be a good manager.
Yeah. And one of the things that make managers like Gabe Kapler successful is the way that they utilize the information that they have. And there is no amount of information that prepares you for 7 relievers in today's baseball to be unavailable to you, 6 of whom are your best relievers. It just doesn't work.
No, and I'll be the first to say I find analytics is hurt in baseball as much as some will disagree. And I know we've had this discussion before, but analytics cannot prepare you for injuries. Analytics only help so far for a manager. And these situations are out of his control and out of analytics control. what analytical thing do you want to use to help injuries? There is really nothing.
There isn't anything that you can do to sit there. You could do what the Phillies did in the offseason, and you can select players like Andrew McCutchen and David Robertson, who have been nothing but models of healthy consistency and availability for their teams, over Brantley, who has probably had more left in the tank than what McCutchen did, and Andrew Miller, who might be a sexier name, an option out of the pen, especially as he's left-handed, than David Robertson, but neither one of those two can stay on the field, except for this year, because it defies all odds and everything like that. But they made, in theory, the correct decision. So you can look at certain things, and that's not necessarily analytics. That's just track record and history to what a player's body has done, and how many innings they play or pitch per year, and how many games they appear in per year. Like, you can look at all those types of tendencies, but yet nothing prepares you for a potential season-ending injury. And no one goes into it. No front office says, we're going to acquire via free agency, we're going to spend more than what the average team probably would spend for a former MVP and Andrew McCutchen. But don't worry, we're also going to acquire an additional stud player that we're going to keep on the bench as a fourth out. It just doesn't make sense. So yeah, to an extent, you're right. You don't prepare for injuries. You just hope that you have enough sustainability behind you, especially in baseball, where injuries shouldn't be the end of the world. But even the people we've brought up have gotten hurt. I mean, look at Adam Hazley. He got hurt. Like, it's just the luck of the draw. I mean, at this point, we could bring anybody up and something would happen. It's just been the luck of the Phillies season. It has. So we got about 10, 15 minutes left on this pod here. So we're going to roll into the Eagles, our Eagles, not really a debate, but just a bit of a conversation here. You and LJ on your Kelly Green Hour had brought up the conversation that, do the Eagles have quality in their cornerbacks room, or is it just quantity? I don't recall from listening to what you guys had stated on there, your original position on this. But one, if you recall it, has it changed? And two, what can you tell us about your current thoughts on the Eagles cornerback and defensive backs room as a whole?
It absolutely hasn't changed, because you know what? I said that we have a good mix of quantity and quality, because in my personal opinion, the quantity is the type of cornerbacks that you want. Because it's not like we're sitting there and we're saying we have a bunch of bums. We're sitting there and we actually have some quality defensive backs who've done really well. I mean, look at Maddox, look at Douglas, look at LeBlanc last season, and the way they stepped up when we had to go through 13 different defensive backs. When you can go through 13 defensive backs and you have guys who are still stepping up all the way down through, I don't think it's a debate of quantity or quality. I think we have quality quantity. We're going to do quality-quantity. It's a new word for this debate purposes.
And I dig it. We'll name the segment that.
And so, I mean, you have Sidney Jones, and once that confidence is there, I mean, this guy was supposed to be a first-round draft pick. So if he can bring that first-round talent to the team, once he gets that confidence, he can definitely emerge as a leader in that defensive backs room. And I mean, we went through 13 defensive backs last year, and still we ended up with the 30th ranked passing defense. And you know what, my take on it this year, especially because you got Darby coming off an injury and a prove-it year, Mills may actually be starting the season on the PUP list, which just completely opens the door to say, all right, Mills, this is your contract year, so you might finally be able to get rid of Mills and open up the door for Crayvon LeBlanc and open up all these doors for these other guys. This is where the quantity comes into play, because then you see the quality of that quantity that you have. So my final take and position on it, to wrap it up quick, was that the Eagles have one of the deepest defensive back rooms in the NFL that was plagued by injuries last year and inexperience. And I think that the Eagles secondary will end up ranking in the top half of the league in 2019 after being 30th last season. That is my hot take on this situation. I think we end up being a top half of the league secondary, and we really come out proving it. There's a lot of prove-it players who have to put it all on the line this year, and I think you'll see Darby do it. You'll see Jones do it. Maddox was praised as being one of the top guys coming out of minicamp. Douglas looks like this massive new guy. This Douglas we didn't even know from last year. So he could emerge. He could have a renewal, and then the emergence of LeBlanc, will it continue? Will we have like a new nickelback his name slips me. He went to New Orleans on a nice big contract. Patrick Robinson. Could LeBlanc be that Robinson, who sadly Robinson went and got that big contract, but that just speaks to the quality of the player, the quality of the defensive back that the Eagles are churning out.
So my thought is very similar to that. I find for me the biggest quality that we can talk about right now is versatility. And you have right now 3 or 4 guys immediately come to mind that can play outside, they can play inside, they can play safety. And because you have that quantity of like capable bodied players, capable defensive backs back there, all with some sort of versatility there that you can trust. All defensive backs have some sort of versatility where they can. We've seen it. Sidney Jones is a very talented kid and talented player. They tried him on the inside, and while sure you can kind of hold your own, you can tell this is not a spot for him long term. Almost everyone in that defensive backs room right now can be placed anywhere in the secondary, and I would trust. And I feel like that is the biggest quality that you can put towards this room, is their ability to be versatile, especially in a physical game like today's NFL. And coming from a room that you said it featured 13 different defensive backs last year, or cornerbacks last year, having those bodies back there that can play multiple positions is invaluable.
Agreed. And I didn't even think to mention the versatility of the players, but I mean, you can see you could probably move almost any of those guys except the clear nickelback guy like Cravon LeBlanc to safety, and they could probably do the job just as good as cornerback. Some of them, I would argue, right now, some of them would probably do it better than the cornerback position that they play right now. I would argue. Yeah, I think of Mills. I think Mills could be so much better as a box safety who can just watch a play, diagnose a play, and then go after the play than having to make that split-second decision as a cornerback. Because as we've
especially coming off the injury.
Exactly. And you see those split-second decisions, he gets burned. And I don't think he's ever going to change.
Well, I think that's kind of the philosophy of the defense and the philosophy of Jim Schwartz right now. It is we're going to go for the home run. The Eagles. So I talked about this with Ty Dobbert of the Painted Lines on a In Cap We Trust segment. The Eagles are one of the most analytically driven organizations in all of football. And people don't realize that, but there is some statistical, balance or statistical findings that you can sit there to support. Jim Schwartz and his defensive identity and philosophy is kind of to attempt to create the big play. It is the bend, don't break, overall philosophy. But when given the opportunity, those outside cornerbacks, I feel like they're told, bite. Let's see what happens.
Oh, definitely. It's like sometimes I kind of see it as he says, give up the short game. Don't make that impulsive move. And you saw it so often. People would get frustrated by giving up 3 yards, 3 yards, 3 yards, but then you get that stop. So it's fourth down. That's why I like playing off. Like I've seen pictures of how they played different. It was on Twitter. I should have saved it and shared it on Twitter, but like how they played Odell Beckham versus how they played other cornerbacks or other wide receivers like Sterling Shepard. There's always the cornerback under and there was safety over top, and there's always a third corner nearby who's watching like a Shepard but can come off the play and go. Like you don't realize how much goes into a secondary analytically, like you said, and how they play each receiver, how they play different receivers. It's so unique in the way that Jim Schwartz does all of his analytics for defense. It's really quite fascinating.
They prepare.
People are like, oh, Jalen Mills is afraid to get burned, so he plays off. No, that's actually an analytic thing where it's like, I would rather you keep him in front, have him come back to the ball, get 5 yards, you make that sure thing tackle, and suddenly it's a 3rd and 4 or 3rd and 3. And suddenly they have a tough decision on 3rd down. Like, I think it's an analytically driven game, but people don't realize that when a cornerback's playing off, it's not because they're afraid to get burned. It's not because they know they can't keep up, even though in some instances that's what it is. It's all about having faith in the defensive line, forcing the quarterback to throw a ball that he doesn't want to throw, and having the cornerback prepared to diagnose and make the play and shut down that 1st down.
Yeah, and when it comes to the NFL and to the Eagles specifically and the way that they prepare, the way that they study everything, they don't use the word analytics. So what they do becomes accepted by fan bases who, in my opinion, do not understand analytics at all. But because that word is never used, it's accepted by the Eagles fan base as this is just what my team does. Now, the second they begin to use, well, analytically speaking, this is what our data is telling us. This is how we are going to prepare to play our player A to their player X. This is what we're going to do. This is the tendencies that support that. The minute that conversation is had and said out loud, that's like a mutiny of the fan base. The second it doesn't work once. So it's different. It's crazy how in a game where we can physically see in baseball the effects of analytics, when you see the shifts, when you see the differences in pitching and the way these things, it's all fastballs up in the zone now, which is a thing that they used to tell you to avoid because guys threw 90, not 100 miles an hour, and then high spin right curveballs. And that's basically all you need. You need that one other pitch to sit there and keep people honest. But you can physically see in baseball the way that analytics has made an impact. You don't necessarily physically see it unless you're looking for it in the NFL game. And for that, I think that the NFL is forever going to be a more interesting thing to the Philadelphia fan base, no matter how much positive.
I think it's for any
Phillies
fan base, really, because like the analytics only come out in deep dive, and I find deep diving into the stats, like all these really next gen stats, that's the analytics of football. When you dig in and you see them bringing out that next generation stat stuff on TV or Pro Football Focus and all that stuff, I think that's where you really see the analytics. And that's why like a Rasul Douglas ranked out as our best cornerback, because it is the analytical deep dive in stats of what he brought to the team. Not necessarily when you watched him get burned for that one touchdown every game and then you never heard from him again for the rest of it. Like that's the thing you don't realize. In football, the analytics, you have to really deep dive for it. But in baseball, you just see it when there's 3 people standing by the third baseman. Like you said, you see that. It's like, oh, wow, that looks ugly for the game, or, oh, that doesn't look good. But it works there, too. It just works differently in the NFL.
Exactly. So our final point, and we're only going to tease this one because we're actually going to have a second episode of Crossing Borders this week. I believe we're going to try to record this one tomorrow. But NBA free agency has been a complete madhouse. So we're just going to tease this one right now. So our original thought and process behind this was 76ers Plan B. So let's just introduce the tweet that we're going to be using in our argument tomorrow. And we're obviously going to dive in well beyond just the 76ers in this Crossing Borders tomorrow. We're probably going to double and triple up on free agency talk this week on several different shows. And honestly, for the landscape of the NBA changing this season, it's warranted. But let's tease our tweet that we're going to use and just give a quick reason as to why we selected it. And then we'll wrap this segment up. So Connor, I'll start with you.
So I picked an Elliot Shore Parks tweet, and it was said, quote, "I would absolutely trade Jimmy Butler for Eric Gordon and Clint Capella," end quote. I picked this because I don't believe that the Rockets had the better package, and now, well, we've seen the actual package that we got, and a lot of people are complaining about what the return, and well, obviously the trade isn't fully and completely gone through yet. Apparently the Heat kind of messed around with the Mavericks, and the Mavericks aren't getting all that they wanted. But I think that the more interesting package was in Miami, and the more interesting package was a guy like Richardson, who we are hopefully getting in return for this deal. I think that Richardson fits the mold and fits the team better than he's more or less a much younger version of Jimmy Butler, obviously with some modifications to the game, but he's similar to Jimmy Butler, but 5 years younger, and comes at a much more team-friendly contract for the next 3 or 4 years, I think.
Point on him. Yep.
So the team-friendly contract, the fact he had a breakout year where he averaged 16 points a game. I mean, he doesn't bring a whole lot from the rebounding and the assist side. I mean, I think he averaged 3 assists and a couple rebounds. But, I mean, at the end of the day, Jimmy Butler didn't go out there and get double-doubles every night either. He was just that scoring threat, and I think that Miami just had the more attractive package than Houston, and I thought Houston wanting Butler was just a complete – it was laughable. It was like condemning to their fan base to bring another ego in with James Harden and Chris Paul. And, I mean, Clint Capella, yeah, he's a great player, but we got Al Horford. Horford's a defensive-minded player. I think he's a great supporting cast for Embiid, and Brett Brown can do a lot more there. And Eric Gordon, I think we just same thing. We got a younger, better version with Richardson. A younger, better shooting guard. Versatility, he's a shooting guard, small forward. I saw a tweet today. He's the shortest player in our starting lineup at 6'6".
Yeah.
Richardson. So we have a monster, defensive-minded.
Yeah, no one's scoring at the rim against us.
No, and even on the outside, I mean, you take away Redick and you put in like Richardson, our biggest liability on defense is Tobias Harris, and I wouldn't even consider that a liability. He kept up. JJ Redick was always chasing, and it ended up in a Danny Green 3 or something along those lines. Harris doesn't necessarily always chase. It's just finding the right defense to play. But then you look at the draft with Matisse Thybulle, like you can go on. This defense is going to be crazy.
So my tweet was from Michael KB, the real Mike KB. Jimmy Butler likes to have the ball in his hands. I don't see him wanting to play with James Harden or Chris Paul. So when I originally sent this to myself, I had said this is one of the main reasons why I believe that this sign and trade was just smoke, and that I did not believe it was going to happen. Now, obviously, the sign and trade happens and he goes to Miami. I genuinely never considered Miami as a real threat to go here, or for Jimmy to go. But I will say, going along kind of with your point, at the end of the day, it was, Robert Covington and Dario Saric for an exciting playoff run with an exciting player and a big personality in Jimmy Butler for half a season, a little more. And then 3 years of a very team-friendly contract through 2022 with a very, very exciting up-and-coming player. It's not a superstar by any means, but fitting the mold of a true need for the 76ers lineup is important and was important. And I think that for the details that have been released thus far, I think it was a really good move by the 76ers, and a necessary one at that. And I do believe that with the depth and with the financial flexibility and ability to get a guy like Horford, while I don't believe that contract will age very well, I am excited nonetheless for what this new starting five and what Brett Brown can do with a team that is now his team. There should not be any major shakeups to what this roster is, for at least the next couple of years. And that's really, really important for placing your trust in a coach like Brett Brown, who's seemingly constantly on a hot seat for no fucking reason.
Agreed. I think it's just because of the pieces he had. But I mean, at the end of the day, if Jimmy really didn't want to be here, and I mean, to sit there and say in an interview that you're in it for a championship, and then you go to Miami, who also moved Hassan Whiteside today, you're clearly not in it for a championship. You just clearly didn't want to be in Philadelphia. At the end of the day, I think that's what it came down to.
I still want to know.
I mean, I did see reports from ESPN that there was clashes of egos still, and that Butler wanted a team of his own that they build around him. But I mean, egos are going to be egos, and they're going to be there. Eventually, someone will come around in Miami with an ego that'll clash with Jimmy Butler. And
Oh,
At
they
the end
just
of the
moved
day,
the ego.
or they move the ego and they never get. I mean, these big guys though, like I mean, you think about the potential idea or concept of him going to Houston. There's egos everywhere you go. Eventually, when you get big enough, you get an ego. And that's the situation that probably came with Simmons and Embiid is they have their own type of egos because they know that they're the ones being built around in Philadelphia, and Jimmy Butler got mad because he wasn't the one being built around. And that's the same. We look at where he came from with Cat in Minnesota and the building around him. Same situation. He just doesn't like to not be the one that they build around. And I think he says it's ego, but I kind of think that that's the ego thing. It's his own ego getting in the way because he wants to be the one built around.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And from everything that we've heard so far, the things that we can infer just about what we have known or believed to be true about Jimmy Butler, I don't necessarily think any of this can be truly, truly surprising or shocking. But we're going to cut that point here because anymore it's no longer going to be a tease. We're going to be halfway down. So, but a quick word from our sponsor, Just Food. Treat yourself, take it home. Just Food is a catering service. They also have an in-shop location in Buckingham Green in Bucks County, PA, just above Peddler's Village. If you ever have a catering need that is something of your fancier type of food, your high-class type of food, they can provide a menu that will suit that. They can also simplify to whatever your palate may be. So if you're just looking for a backyard barbecue or some appetizers on a Friday night for a game night with friends, have Just Food cater. Ask for Rob. Tell him Shane from ANYP sent you. Delicious, delicious food over there, by the way. And if you ever want to stop in and give their food just a shot, just for the sake of giving it a shot, stop in their shop location. Same thing. Tell Rob that Shane from ANYP sent you, and he'll hook you up. But Connor, like I said, we will be back with a additional full free agency piece tomorrow. We'll talk a lot of 76ers, and we'll talk a lot about some of the larger landscape changes that have happened over the last 24, 48 hours in all of the NBA. But before we totally close it out, do you have any final thoughts or anything you want to shake up on?
Nope. I don't think there's much more to say. I mean, there's so much more to say, but just not tonight.
I feel that. I got to go buy my lady some wine. She had a shit day. And because I'm trying to be a decent human, I'm going to take care of that. Connor, as always, man, it's been great. You can follow Connor on Twitter at Connor10. That's Connor TEN. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at Shane_Mead. Follow the podcast on our Twitter as well. You'll catch up with all the things that LJ and Connor have done so well with in terms of keeping up with all the trades that are happening or free agent signings that are happening in the NBA and the NHL right now. The podcast account is at ANY Podcast. You can also follow us on our website. It's www.alwaysnextyearpodcast.com. Connor, as mentioned, will have a piece coming out shortly on the Flyers and their draft. Rob just had an article came out, his 15 thoughts. He had that come out just a few days ago as well. We think some of us will also continue to write. I don't know. Stephanie may write something about the inequality of pay between men and women's sports. That should be fascinating and cause for arguments across the board, I'm sure. But we'll have content up there nevertheless. Be sure to drop a ratings in wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it be Apple Podcasts, whether it be iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, Spotify, SoundCloud, wherever. Drop us a review. Tell us how we're doing. Leave us 5 stars. For Connor, I'm Shane. We'll see you next week on Crossing Borders. We'll see you tomorrow on Crossing Borders.
A fighting man I used to be, revered and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hitching with the wind. But if Mickey Flynn should ever find me, I'll throw me caution all behind me and square off on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too, he beat me Sunday through and through, and such over my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, well lucky son, still happy life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.